She thought she'd won a home, but what she really opened was a door to someone else's unfinished life. When Margaret Parker pushed open the creaking farmhouse door, sunlight broke through the dusty air like ghostly fingers reaching for her. Every sound echoed: the groan of old wood, the rattle of loose glass, the sigh of forgotten rooms. Her hands trembled as she stepped inside, dragging behind her a duffel bag that held all she owned. After 3 years of sleeping in her car, she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to have a roof. The town raffle had been her last chance. One $5 ticket, bought with coins scraped from her car's ashtray. Now she stood inside a house that looked untouched since 1978. Plates still sat on the dining table. A coffee mug was half full. Toys rested on the living room rug. It was as if the Callaway family had stood up mid-dinner and simply disappeared. Just 5 years earlier, Margaret had everything. A corner office at a finance firm, a husband who wore pressed suits and perfect smiles, a mother who'd always told her that hard work would save her from struggle. But life doesn't take everything at once. It chips away slowly. First came the divorce, then her mother's diagnosis, pancreatic cancer. Margaret sold everything to cover the hospital bills, but it wasn't enough. 6 months later, her mother was gone. Then came the layoffs. Overnight, her career, her marriage, and her savings vanished. For 3 years, she lived in her Honda Civic, parking in different neighborhoods every night so the police wouldn't notice. She learned which grocery stores left old fruit by the dumpsters, which gyms would let her shower unnoticed. Still, every morning she looked in the mirror and whispered, "Not forever." The diner waitress named Doris had been the first person to look her in the eye with kindness. "Town's giving away old properties," Doris had said, sliding her a flyer. "Just $5 a ticket. But if you win, you've got to live there, even if it's haunted." Margaret had laughed. "But when you've lost everything, ghosts don't scare you. Hope does." The drive to Milfield felt like driving backward in time. Vaded barns, half-collapsed stores, signs rusted by decades of rain. The people stared at her car as she passed, their faces unreadable, curious but wary. When she stopped for supplies, the hardware store clerk froze the moment she mentioned the Callaway place. The sheriff himself approached her before she left. "Stay at the motel first," he said quietly. "That property has history." But Margaret had spent years living in fear already. Fear of losing her job, her home, her dignity. This time she refused to run. She unlocked the farmhouse door and began cleaning. Every corner whispered secrets. In the kitchen, she found a wall calendar stopped on May 12, 1978, a dentist appointment circled in red ink. Sarah. Upstairs, 3 bedrooms waited in silence, one for a man, one for a teenage boy, and one with pink walls dolls, and a small diary locked tight. That night, as rain began to tap against the windows, she lay in her sleeping bag on the floor and tried to convince herself the house was just a house. Then came the noise, a metallic clatter from the kitchen, and then a soft, distinct thud from upstairs. Margaret grabbed her flashlight. The door of the little girl's room creaked open, and there, in the dust, was a tiny footprint, fresh, bare, human. Morning sunlight made everything feel harmless again, but Margaret couldn't shake the sense that she wasn't alone. She returned to the diner, hoping Doris might know more. Instead, she met an old woman named Martha Winters, the town historian. "That farm's been empty since the Callaways vanished," Martha said. "No one touches it, not after what happened." When Margaret asked what she meant, the woman only whispered, "Not ghosts, dear, just history that refuses to stay buried." That night, Margaret drove to the property's edge, where she met Gerald Murphy, the neighboring farmer. He was a tall man, with ice-blue eyes and a voice like worn gravel. "You're the one who won that place," he said. "Should have let it rot," When she asked why, his gaze drifted toward the field. Because Thomas Callaway wasn't farming in those last months. He was digging every night. Said he'd struck something valuable. Gold, maybe. But whatever he found, it changed him. His voice dropped. Then one morning the whole family was gone. And no one's heard from them since. Margaret left with her pulse racing. That night, the wind howled through the farmhouse like it was trying to speak. A storm hit just after sunset, sudden, violent, unnatural. Lightning lit the sky like flashbulbs. Thunder shook the walls. Margaret ran outside to secure the barn door as rain pounded her face. Then a beam collapsed, shaking the earth beneath her. When the dust settled, she saw something. A trap door buried beneath the debris, sealed with rusted hinges. With trembling hands she pried it open. Wooden steps descended into darkness. The air that rose from below was cold and metallic, like the breath of the past itself. The next morning, she brought Tom from the hardware store and his nephew Jake. Together they climbed down into the earth. The tunnel stretched for yards, its walls carved and supported by thick wooden beams. On them, initials, T.C. and J.C., Thomas and James Callaway. Farther in, they found a small mining cart, shovels, and, most chilling of all, a row of drawings taped to the stone. Crayon figures of a smiling family. The house, the barn, the tunnels, each one signed in a child's handwriting. Sarah. In a rusted metal box, Margaret found a bundle of letters wrapped in faded ribbon. They were written by Eleanor Callaway, the mother, to her sister in Boston. At first, they were full of warmth, describing life on the farm. But as the years went on, her tone shifted. She wrote about her husband's obsession, the fights with their neighbor Gerald over the water rights, the strange equipment arriving in the mail. "He's found something in the ground," one letter said. "He says it will change everything." The last letter was dated May 10th, 1978, 2 days before they vanished. "Becky, I'm frightened. Thomas says we may need to leave quickly. The children are scared. I've packed a suitcase just in case." But they never left. Margaret's discovery made local headlines. The sheriff reopened the case. When they searched the tunnel again, they found journals written by a child. "There was a loud crash," one entry read. "The roof fell. I tried to dig but couldn't. I heard Mommy crying under the rocks. Then silence." The handwriting trembled at the end, but one line stood out. "I'm not leaving. This is my home now." The truth settled like dust. Sarah Callaway had survived, and she'd stayed hidden all these years. That night, Margaret heard footsteps again, soft, deliberate. Then a voice, "Not here. The cabin." In the morning, she found a map drawn on her kitchen table, leading into the woods. Following it, she came to a small cabin covered in vines, smoke curling from the chimney. A woman stepped outside, thin, sharp-eyed, her voice rough from disuse. "You're living in my house," she said. It was Sarah, alive. She had grown into a ghost of a woman, surviving off the land, watching from the shadows. As they talked, Sarah revealed something that made Margaret's knees buckle. Eleanor Callaway had given birth to another child before Sarah, a daughter she'd given up for adoption. "Her name was Margaret," Sarah said softly. "Our mother never stopped looking for her." The truth hit like lightning. The raffle, the town, the whispers, none of it was random. Margaret hadn't just won the Callaway farm. She had come home to her own blood. 6 months later, the Callaway sisters' farm was alive again. The barn was rebuilt, the tunnels sealed, and the ghosts finally at rest. The sheriff stood beside them as they buried the remains of Thomas, Eleanor, and James beneath the oak tree, 40 years after the earth first swallowed them. The townspeople came to help, Doris with her pies, Tom with his tools, Martha with her archives. Even Gerald Murphy arrived, leaning on his cane, eyes full of quiet regret. When the ceremony ended, he handed Sarah a folded deed. "The spring water belongs to you again," he said. It always did. That evening, as the sun melted behind the fields, Margaret and Sarah stood on the porch under the new sign, Callaway Sisters Farm. Margaret took the silver locket she'd worn her whole life, half a heart given by her adoptive parents. Sarah pulled out its twin, the piece their mother had kept. Together, they formed one whole heart engraved EC plus MC. Tears blurred their vision. "We're finally home," Sarah whispered. Margaret smiled. "After 40 years," she said softly, "the house finally found its family. If this story gave you chills, hit that like button, share it with someone who loves dark true stories, and subscribe, because every house has a history. But some never stop waiting to be found."